The air crackled with the energy of the mating moon, thick with the scent of pine smoke and wild anticipation. Every unmated Lycan in the Blackwood pack stood with their faces turned to the sky, waiting for the goddess to reveal the other half of their soul. For years I'd held on to this night like a prayer. Maybe tonight they would finally see me, Elara. Not the Omega herbalist who lived in the shadow of the pack house. Not the girl whose parents had been killed by rogues, leaving her with nothing. Just me. A hush fell over the crowd. Kale the Alpha stepped into the center of the clearing. He was carved from moonlight and power, his presence a physical force that demanded respect. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, hopeful rhythm. The sacred mate bond, a shimmering thread of fate I'd felt humming in my soul for weeks, suddenly flared to life, pulling me toward him. It was him. The goddess had chosen me for him. He began to walk, his eyes scanning the crowd. The pack parted before him. He was getting closer. The bond between us was a silent song, a chord of destiny only we could hear. He stopped just feet away and his gaze finally locked with mine. I saw it. The flash of recognition in his dark eyes, the slight flare of his nostrils as he caught my scent. My true mate. A slow, cruel smile spread across his lips. The beautiful music in my soul stuttered. Her, he said, his voice a low growl of pure disgust that carried across the clearing. He looked at me not as a mate but as something he'd scraped off his boot. The moon goddess has a sick sense of humor. He turned to the pack, his voice booming with authority. The bond is mistaken. This pack will not be led by a weak-blooded, parentless Omega. Her bloodline is a stain. I, Kale Alpha of the Blackwood pack, reject this bond. I reject her. The words were a physical blow, shattering the shimmering thread between us. The pain was so absolute, so blinding it dropped me to my knees. A collective gasp rippled through the pack, followed by a wave of cruel, mocking laughter. He hadn't just rejected me. He had executed my soul in front of everyone I had ever known. Chapter 2. A Sentence of Exile. I remained on my knees, the world a blur of firelight and spinning shadows. The laughter of my packmates was a storm of stones, each one finding its mark. Kale watched me, his face a mask of cold satisfaction. He had asserted his power and I was the price. Get her out of my sight, he snarled, his voice devoid of any emotion but contempt. Two of his guards, Lycans I had known my whole life, grabbed my arms. Their touch was rough, impersonal. They hauled me to my feet, my legs too weak to hold me. I looked at Kale one last time, a silent, desperate plea in my eyes. Please, don't do this. He simply turned his back. They dragged me through the celebrating crowd, past the pitying stares and the triumphant smirks. No one spoke up. No one met my eye. To them I was already a ghost. They dragged me past the pack house, past the small hut where I grew my healing herbs, and straight to the edge of our territory. The ancient warding stones that kept rogues out hummed with power. Alpha's orders, one of the guards grunted, shoving me forward. You are banished. If you set foot on Blackwood land again, you will be hunted down and killed as a rogue. He shoved me hard. I stumbled and fell, landing painfully on the cold, damp earth outside the pack's wards. The ground was rough, littered with sharp stones that cut into my palms. I looked back just in time to see the heavy wooden gates of my home slam shut. The final, deafening sound of my old life ending. I was alone. Bruised, heartbroken, and utterly alone in the dark, unforgiving wilderness. As the reality of my situation crashed down on me, a violent wave of nausea churned in my stomach. I doubled over, my body convulsing. It wasn't just the shock. It wasn't just the grief. It was something else. A cold, terrifying realization was beginning to dawn in the deepest parts of my soul. Chapter 3. A Life in the Shadows. The sickness that gripped me was a relentless predator. I spent the first night of my exile shivering in the hollow of a fallen log, my body heaving until there was nothing left. Despair was a cold, heavy blanket, and it would have been so easy to let it smother me. To simply lie here and let the forest claim what was left of my broken spirit. But as dawn broke, painting the sky in bruised shades of purple and gray, the feeling returned. That strange deep-down knowing. I pressed a trembling hand to my still flat stomach. The nausea. The exhaustion I'd been feeling for weeks. The way my sense of smell had sharpened, a detail I'd dismissed as a healer's quirk. Oh goddess. Oh. It was a truth so impossible, so catastrophic, it felt like another rejection. A life. A tiny, secret spark I hadn't even known existed. His life. His pup. The despair didn't just vanish. It was burned away by a sudden volcanic eruption of rage. A pure white-hot fury that incinerated the pain and solidified my will into something sharp and hard. How dare he? How dare he condemn us both to this fate? This child wasn't a mistake. This child wasn't a stain. This child was mine. That single thought changed everything. I was no longer an exiled Omega. I was a mother. My survival was no longer a question. It was a command. I pushed myself up, my muscles screaming in protest. A low growl rumbled in my chest, a sound I had never made before. It was feral. It was defiant. I looked not back toward the home that had cast me out, but forward into the deep, dangerous unknown of the wilderness. He wanted me to disappear. Fine. I would become a ghost. He wanted me to die. I would live. For the innocent life growing inside me, I would become stronger than anyone ever thought I could be. Chapter 4. The First Kill. Survival was a brutal teacher. The forest that had once been my sanctuary of healing herbs was now a battlefield, and I was its most unprepared soldier. I was a mender, not a breaker. A healer, not a hunter. But hunger was a merciless master, and my pup's silent, desperate need was a constant fire in my belly. My first attempts at hunting were a humiliating failure. I was clumsy, loud, and the rabbits and squirrels I tried to stalk seemed to mock me before they vanished. I returned to the makeshift shelter I'd found, a shallow cave behind a curtain of moss, empty-handed, my stomach a hollow cavern of shame. Kalen's hungry cries a symphony of my own inadequacy. Tears of frustration streamed down my face. I can't do this. But then I felt it. A tiny, almost imperceptible flutter deep inside me. A little life reminding me why I had to. I wiped my eyes, the rage from before cooling into a hard, sharp focus. I couldn't hunt like a Lycan warrior. I didn't have their strength or their training. But I had a healer's knowledge. I knew the forest. I spent the next hour not hunting but observing. I found a game trail hidden beneath ferns. I used my knowledge of knots to fashion a simple snare from tough vines, just like my father had shown me as a child. I set it carefully, baiting it with the last of the edible berries I'd foraged. And then I waited. The snap of the vine was the loudest, most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I took the rabbit with a whispered apology to its spirit and a surge of fierce, triumphant gratitude. Holding its weight in my hands, I felt a profound shift. I was no longer just surviving. I was providing. I was a protector. As I knelt by a stream to prepare my first real meal in days, a twig snapped in the undergrowth behind me. It wasn't the sound of a small animal. It was heavy, deliberate. My head shot up, my heart instantly pounding in my throat. A low growl, thick with menace, echoed through the trees. I was no longer the only predator in this part of the woods. Chapter 5. The Scent of a King. Panic, cold and absolute, seized me. I dropped the rabbit, my hand flying instinctively to my stomach. The growl came again, closer this time. I backed away slowly, my eyes scanning the dense shadows of the ancient woods. Then I saw him. A rogue. Huge, scarred and alone, with madness burning in his yellow eyes. He was a Lycan who had been cast out, his mind broken by solitude and desperation. He saw me for what I was. A lone female, weak and easy prey. My own wolf, a creature I had always suppressed, rose within me. There was no room for fear now. There was only the primal, absolute need to protect my child. I let out a snarl that surprised even me, baring my teeth. It was a bluff and we both knew it. He was a seasoned killer and I was a novice who had just learned to snare a rabbit. He lunged. I didn't think. I reacted. I threw myself to the side, scrambling over slick rocks and tangled roots. A desperate, heart-pounding chase began. His heavy paws thundered behind me, getting closer with every second. He was toying with me, enjoying the fear that radiated from me like heat. I ran blindly, gasping for breath, my only thought to put distance between that monster and the precious life I carried. I didn't see the subtle change in the trees, the ancient carved stones half buried in the moss. I didn't realize I had crossed a border until the rogue behind me suddenly skidded to a halt. He stopped dead at an invisible line, his snarling turning into a terrified whimper. He looked past me into the woods ahead, and his eyes were filled with a primal terror that dwarfed his own savagery. With a final, pathetic cry, he turned and fled back the way he came. I stood panting, confused, my legs shaking. I had escaped. But why? Then I smelled it. A new scent on the wind, cutting through the forest's damp, earthy perfume. It was a scent of ozone after a lightning strike, of ancient stone, and of power so immense, so absolute, it felt like a mountain pressing down on me. This was no rogue's territory. This was a kingdom. And I had just trespassed into the domain of its king. Chapter 6. The King's Judgment. The scent of the king was a physical weight, pressing down on the forest, silencing the very birds in the trees. I stood frozen, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. From the shadows they emerged. Not a disorganized patrol, but a unit of warriors who moved with the silent, lethal grace of hunting panthers. They were larger than any Lycan I had ever seen, their fur the color of storm clouds and granite. They fanned out, surrounding me, their eyes glowing with a cold, disciplined light. There was no escape. Then he appeared. He stepped out from behind an ancient oak, and the world seemed to hold its breath. He was not like Kale, who was a creature of brute force and arrogance. This king was something else entirely. He was ancient, his power an aura that felt as old as the mountains themselves. His hair was a mane of dark silver, and his eyes were the color of a frozen sky, holding a chilling emptiness that seemed to pierce right through me. A long, jagged scar ran from his temple down his jaw, a stark white line against his weathered skin. He moved with a slow, deliberate purpose, his gaze sweeping over me, taking in my torn clothes, the dirt on my skin, the wild fear in my eyes. His expression was unreadable, carved from stone. He was the judge, the jury, and the executioner, all in one terrifying form. "A trespasser," he said. His voice was not a shout but a low rumble like rocks grinding together deep within the earth. It was a voice that had given commands and passed sentences for centuries. "And a rogue by the scent of your fear." I clutched my stomach, my own wolf rising in a desperate, foolish surge of defiance. I would not cower. Not for my own sake but for the life I protected. He took another step closer, his frozen eyes narrowing. For a split second, his gaze dropped from my face to where my hand rested on my belly. A flicker of something, not surprise but a deep ancient pain, flashed in their depths before the stone mask slammed back into place. My end had come. I braced myself for the killing blow. He stopped, standing over me, a monolith of shadow and power. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. "Take her," the king commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. "She is my prisoner." Chapter 7. A Gilded Cage. I expected a dungeon, chains, the cold, damp dark. Instead they led me through the heart of a fortress carved from the mountain itself, a place of breathtaking, brutalist grandeur. They took me to a room that was larger than any home in my old pack. A fire crackled in a stone hearth, casting a warm glow on walls lined with ancient tapestries. A bed piled high with soft black furs looked more comfortable than anything I had ever known. It was a cage. A beautiful, opulent cage. One of the warriors, a female with eyes as sharp as his, placed a tray on a wooden table. It held roasted chicken, fresh bread, and a pitcher of clean water. My stomach clenched with a hunger so fierce it was painful, but I didn't move. This was a test. I would not show weakness. "The king orders you to eat and rest," she said, her voice clipped and formal. Then she turned and left, the heavy wooden door closing behind her with a definitive thud. The lock turning was a sound of finality. I was a prisoner, a curiosity on display. For hours I sat on the edge of the bed, rigid with suspicion, every muscle coiled and ready to fight. Why this? Why keep me alive? A quick death in the forest would have been simpler. This was a game and I was the pawn, but I didn't understand the rules. As night fell, the door creaked open again. It was him. The Ice King. He entered the room and the air instantly grew colder, charged with his immense power. He didn't speak. He simply stood by the door, his silver eyes sweeping the room before landing on me. His gaze was not warm or even curious. It was the detached assessment of a predator examining a new, unpredictable creature that had wandered into its den. Fear, sharp and familiar, pricked at me. I lifted my chin, refusing to be cowed. He looked at the untouched food, then back at me. "My prisoners do not starve themselves," he stated, his voice a low command. It is an insult to my authority. Eat. The sheer, unshakable power in that single word was more compelling than any physical threat. But it was the flicker of something else in his eyes that held me captive. It wasn't cruelty. It was a profound, soul-deep weariness, as if he had seen too many battles, too many betrayals, to have any room left for mercy. And I had no idea why he was choosing to show it to me now. Chapter 8. A glimpse of the man. I forced myself to eat, my movements stiff under his unnerving gaze. Each bite of bread felt like swallowing dust, but I would not disobey a direct command. Not yet. Not until I understood the danger I was in. He watched me in silence until I was done. Who are you? He finally asked, his voice cutting through the quiet. Elara, I whispered, my voice hoarse from disuse. And the pup you carry? He pressed, his silver eyes unreadable. Which alpha was foolish enough to cast out his own blood? The question was a key, unlocking a torrent of pain and fury. He is not an alpha, I spat, my voice trembling with a rage I couldn't contain. He is a coward. And this pup, I said, my hand moving protectively to my stomach, is mine. And mine alone. The words hung in the air, a declaration of war. I expected him to mock me, to punish me for my insolence. Instead, a shadow passed over his face. The stone facade cracked, and for a breathtaking instant, I saw the man beneath the king. I saw a landscape of pure, unadulterated pain. A mate's betrayal, he murmured, the words sounding like they were dragged from a place of deep, agonizing memory. He looked away from me, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames in the hearth. It is a unique kind of poison. A wound that never truly heals. The raw anguish in his voice shocked me into stillness. This wasn't a king interrogating a rogue. This was a wounded man seeing his own scars reflected in a stranger. He seemed to catch himself, the mask of cold authority slamming back down. He straightened, his voice once again a low rumble of command. You will remain here. You will be fed and cared for. You are under my protection. He turned and strode from the room without another word, leaving me reeling in a state of utter confusion. Protection? From what? And what ghost had my defiant words just awakened in the heart of this terrifying, broken king? Chapter 9. Whispers and Warnings. For 3 days I lived in that gilded cage. The female warrior, whose name I learned was Brenna, brought me food and herbs for the lingering aches of my exile. She spoke little, but her eyes held a guarded curiosity. I was an anomaly, a rogue prisoner who was being treated like a guest, and the entire pack was watching. I could feel their eyes on me whenever Brenna insisted I walk in the small walled garden adjoining my rooms. I could hear their whispers snatched on the wind. The Stone King, they call him, one said, hasn't shown an ounce of mercy since the night she betrayed him. Why is this rogue different? What does he see in her? The Stone King. It suited him. There was a hardness to him that went deeper than muscle and bone. It was in his soul. I learned from the whispers that years ago his fated mate, his queen, had sold his pack's secrets to their enemies. An attack during a peace summit had cost him his father and dozens of his best warriors. They said he killed her himself, and his heart had turned to stone that very night. One afternoon, a burly warrior, his face a road map of old scars, blocked my path in the garden. The king may be blind to the viper he's brought into our home, he sneered, his eyes filled with suspicion. But we are not. One wrong move, rogue, and I will finish what your own alpha started. Before I could even respond, Brenna was there, a low snarl on her lips. You will address the king's guest with respect, Torvin, she growled, her hand on the hilt of her dagger. Or you will answer to me. He backed down, but his message was clear. I was an outsider, a threat. Later that evening, an older female, the pack's healer, came to my room. Her name was Maeve, and her eyes, unlike the others, held a gentle wisdom. He gave me a soothing tea for my nerves. Be careful, child, she said softly, her wrinkled hand resting on my arm. The king has not allowed an unknown female into this fortress in 20 years. He is powerful and he is just, but his heart is a place of ghosts. When he looks at you, I fear he does not see you at all. Chapter 10. The Ghost in His Eyes. Maeve's warning echoed in my mind, a chilling counterpoint to the fragile sense of safety I had begun to feel. What ghosts did the king see when he looked at me? My answer came 2 days later. An alarm sounded through the fortress, not of an attack but of an accident. A young pup, the son of the warrior Torvin who had threatened me, had fallen from a training scaffold. His leg was badly broken, the bone piercing the skin, and he was losing blood fast. Maeve and the other healers were struggling to stop the bleeding. I didn't hesitate. I ran from my room, following the cries of the pup and the frantic shouts of his parents. I pushed through the crowd to where the small Lycan lay whimpering, his blood staining the stone floor. The bone dust poultice isn't working. Maeve cried, her face pale with distress. You're binding it too tight. You're cutting off what little circulation is left, I said, my healer's instincts taking over completely. Before anyone could stop me, I was kneeling beside the pup. I need spider silk for a clean stitch, crushed yarrow to stop the bleeding, and willow bark for the pain. They stared at me, shocked, but Maeve nodded to her assistants. Get it. Now. I worked quickly, my hands steady. I cleaned the wound, my touch gentle, my voice a low, soothing murmur to the terrified child. I set the bone with a sickening crack that made his mother gasp, and then I began to stitch the torn flesh with a skill they had never seen. I was no longer a rogue, no longer a prisoner. I was a healer in my element, mending what was broken. A hush fell over the crowd. I looked up and saw him. King. Ryker was standing at the edge of the circle watching me. The cold, empty mask was gone. His silver eyes were wide, fixed on me with an expression of raw, agonizing shock. It was as if he were seeing a phantom. I finished my work, wrapping the pup's leg in a clean bandage. I stroked the child's head, whispering that he would be all right. And then the king spoke, his voice a choked, broken whisper that was not meant for anyone but the ghost he saw before him. Elara. Chapter 11. A name from the past. The name hung in the air, heavy and strange. It meant nothing to me, but to the pack it was a thunderclap. A collective gasp rippled through the warriors. Brenna's face went pale, and even the stoic Maeve looked shaken. The king, Ryker, seemed to realize what he had said, the ghost he had accidentally revealed. The mask of stone slammed back down, harder and colder than ever before. Without another word, he turned and stalked away, the crowd parting before him like a river around a boulder. His silent fury was more terrifying than any roar. Torvin, the warrior who had threatened me, knelt beside his now sleeping son, his face a mixture of gratitude and bewildered shame. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with a grudging respect. Thank you, he grunted, the words clearly costing him. You saved him. I simply nodded, my mind reeling. Who was Elara? And why did my presence conjure her ghost? Later that night, Maeve came to my room, her face etched with a gravity I hadn't seen before. She sat opposite me, her old hands twisting in her lap. The king has not spoken that name in 20 years, she began, her voice a low whisper. Elara was his mother. My breath caught in my throat. She was not just his mother, she was the greatest healer our people have ever known, Maeve continued, her eyes distant with memory. She could mend wounds that others deemed fatal. She moved with grace and certainty, just as you did today. When the king saw you by that child's side, he did not see a rogue. He saw his mother returning from the ashes. The revelation was a shock that went bone deep. He wasn't haunted by the mate who had betrayed him. Not alone. He was haunted by the mother he had lost. Elara, it turned out, had died in the same surprise attack that had killed his father, the one orchestrated by his treacherous mate. He had lost his entire family in one night of fire and blood. He has built these walls around his fortress and his heart to ensure such a loss never happens again, Maeve said, her voice filled with a profound sadness. He sees all outsiders as a threat. But you are a threat of a different kind. You do not threaten his life. You threaten his grief. Chapter 12. The Thawing of the Stone. My status in the pack shifted overnight. I was no longer just the rogue prisoner. I was the healer who had saved the Alpha's heir presumptive. The woman who had stirred the ghost of their beloved former Luna. The open hostility faded, replaced by a wary, watchful respect. Ryker avoided me. For days I did not see him at all. But I felt his presence everywhere. A new fur blanket would appear on my bed. A rare, potent healing herb I had only mentioned in passing to Maeve would be left on my table. He was watching me, providing for me from a distance as if he were afraid to get any closer. One evening, I found him in the walled garden, standing before a small, unmarked stone at its center. It was the only place where the wild mountain flowers were allowed to grow untamed. I knew instinctively that this was his mother's grave. He didn't seem surprised to see me. He didn't turn, but his shoulders tensed. She loved this garden, he said, his voice low and rough with an emotion he rarely showed. She said that healing was not about forcing things to grow, but about creating the right conditions for life to flourish on its own. I walked to stand beside him, a few feet of respectful silence between us. My parents used to say something similar, I murmured. They were herbalists. They taught me everything I know. He finally turned to look at me, and the ice in his eyes had receded, replaced by a profound soul-deep sorrow. They were killed by rogues, weren't they? I flinched, shocked that he knew. How? I am a king. I know what happens in the lands bordering my own, he stated simply. I know of the Blackwood Pack and their cowardly alpha. I know he cast you out. And I know you have carried that loss alone. In that moment he wasn't a king and I wasn't a rogue. We were just two orphans standing at a grave, bound by the shared language of grief. You are not like her, he said, his voice barely a whisper. But your spirit, your hands, they carry the same strength. The same gift. He took a step closer and my heart began to pound. And it is a gift my pack desperately needs. Chapter 13. An offer and a price. I want you to stay, Ryker said, the words hanging in the cool night air. It was not a command but a request. A plea almost. Stay here in Stonefell. Be our healer. Your pup will be born a member of this pack. He will be protected. You will be protected. The offer was everything I should have wanted. Safety. A home. A future for my son. After a lifetime of being an outcast, of being left to die, it was a lifeline. But my instincts screamed that it came with a price. And what do you ask in return? I asked, my voice steady, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. His silver eyes bored into mine, and for the first time, I saw not just a king or a grieving son but a man. A man who was profoundly, dangerously lonely. I ask for your loyalty, he said. To me. To this pack. I will not suffer another betrayal. The unspoken words were clear. I will not allow my heart to be broken again. He was offering me a home, but he was also asking me to help him guard the shattered pieces of his soul. I have never had a pack to be loyal to, I answered honestly. My loyalty has always been to my son. His safety is all that matters. His safety and yours are guaranteed here, Ryker vowed, his voice a low, resonant promise. You have my word. As king. I looked at this powerful, broken man, at the fortress he had built around himself, and I made a decision. I would not be his prisoner. I would not be the ghost of his mother. I would be myself. And I would earn my place here not as a charity case but as an asset. I accept, I said, lifting my chin. I will be your healer. But I will not be locked away in a gilded cage. I will be a member of this pack. I will work. I will contribute. And I will earn the respect of your people, not as your guest, but as Elara of Stonefell. A slow, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of his lips. It was the first time I had ever seen it, and it transformed his harsh features into something devastatingly handsome. I would expect nothing less, he said. Chapter 14. The Serpent at the Gates. Life found a new rhythm. I moved out of the guest chambers and into the healer's wing with Maeve. I spent my days tending to the pack, my knowledge of herbs and remedies proving invaluable. The pup inside me grew, my belly swelling, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of real hope. Kalen, I decided to name him. A name from an old story meaning strong warrior. My relationship with Ryker was a slow, cautious dance. He would visit me in the infirmary, his presence a silent, grounding force. We would speak of healing, of pack politics, of the coming winter. We never spoke of his past or of the strange, undeniable current that hummed between us. It was more than respect, deeper than friendship. It was a fragile, unnamed thing that I was terrified to break. One morning the peace was shattered. The horns on the ramparts blew a sharp, urgent warning. A patrol had intercepted a messenger at the border. A messenger from the Blackwood Pack. I felt a chill run down my spine. Ryker summoned me to the throne room. He sat on his massive stone throne, the king once more, his face an unreadable mask. The messenger, a Lycan I recognized from my old pack, was kneeling before him, trembling. He held out a scroll sealed with Kale's alpha sigil. He knows you are here, Ryker said, his voice flat and cold as he broke the seal. He read the scroll, his expression darkening with every word. A low growl began to rumble in his chest, a sound of pure, barely contained fury. "What is it?" I whispered, my hand instinctively going to my belly. Ryker looked up from the scroll, and the ice in his eyes was blazing with a rage that made the room feel 10 degrees colder. "It is a demand," he snarled, crumpling the parchment in his fist. "Alpha Kale of the Blackwood Pack demands the immediate return of his stolen property." He paused, his gaze locking with mine, filled with a protective fire that stole my breath. "He is demanding the return of his fated mate, and his heir." Chapter 15. The line is drawn. The words hit me like a physical blow. His fated mate. His heir. The hypocrisy was so profound it was breathtaking. He had rejected me, banished me, left me to die. Now that I was safe, now that I was under the protection of a more powerful alpha, he dared to claim me? To claim my son? "He is not my mate," I said, my voice shaking with a cold fury that matched Ryker's. "And this is not his pup. He gave up that right when he threw us to the wolves." Ryker rose from his throne, a towering figure of righteous wrath. He strode down the steps until he stood before the trembling messenger. His voice was not a shout. It was a low, lethal whisper that was infinitely more terrifying. "Go back to your cowardly alpha," he commanded, his silver eyes boring into the man. "You will deliver a message from me. From the King of Stonefell." He turned and held out his hand to me. I took it without hesitation. His grip was warm and strong, a solid anchor in the storm of my fear. He pulled me to his side, standing before the entire court, a united front. "Tell him," Ryker's voice boomed, echoing off the stone walls, "that Elara is not his property. She is the official healer of the Stonefell Pack. She is under my personal protection." He paused, his gaze dropping to my swollen belly, then back to the messenger, his eyes blazing with a possessive fire. "And the pup she carries will be born into my pack. He will be raised as one of my own." He let the threat hang in the air, a promise of violence more absolute than any declaration of war. He was drawing a line in the sand not just for Kale but for everyone. He was claiming us. "Now get out of my sight," he snarled. The messenger scrambled to his feet and fled the throne room as if the hounds of hell were on his heels. Ryker turned to me, his expression softening. He placed his other hand over mine, sandwiching my hand between both of his. "He will not touch you," he vowed, his voice a low, intimate rumble. "He will not touch our son. I will burn his entire world to ash before I let him lay a hand on what is mine." And in the way he said "our son," I knew the fragile, unnamed thing between us had finally been given a name. And it was a name worth fighting a war for. Chapter 16. A declaration of war. Kale did not take the rejection well. His pride, the brittle foundation of his entire identity, had been shattered. My survival was an insult. My protection by a rival king was a challenge. But Ryker's claim over my son, his heir, was a declaration of war. Scouts reported that the Blackwood Pack was massing at the border. They were not preparing for a negotiation. They were preparing for an invasion. Kale, in his arrogance, was going to try and take by force what he had thrown away. The atmosphere in Stonefell grew tense. The warriors sharpened their blades, their faces grim but resolved. They were not just preparing to defend their territory, they were preparing to defend their healer and the unborn pup their king had claimed as his own. I had become a symbol, a testament to their king's promise of protection. I threw myself into my work, preparing healing salves, bandages, and pain-dulling teas. My hands were steady, my focus absolute, but my heart was a knot of cold dread. This was my fault. This looming war, the lives that would be lost. It was all because of me. One night, I found Ryker on the battlements, staring out at the dark expanse of the forest that separated our kingdoms. The weight of his crown seemed heavier than ever. "This is my fault," I whispered, coming to stand beside him. "I should leave. If I'm gone, he will have no reason to attack." Ryker turned to me, his silver eyes blazing in the moonlight. He gripped my shoulders, his touch firm, anchoring me. "Do you think I am a coward like him?" he growled, his voice a low, furious rumble. "Do you think I would hand over a member of my pack to save my own skin? You are Stonefell now, Elara. Your fight is our fight." He softened his grip, his thumb stroking my shoulder. "This is not about you anymore. It is about honor." He broke a sacred bond and abandoned his own blood. An alpha who would do that is a cancer. He cannot be allowed to lead. He looked back out at the enemy territory. He didn't just declare war on me. He declared war on the very laws of our people. And I will be his judgment. His words were a vow not just of protection but of justice. He wasn't just saving me, he was righting a profound wrong. And as he stood there, a bulwark against the coming storm, the fragile, unnamed thing between us blossomed into a fierce, desperate love. Chapter 17. The Serpent's Strike. The attack did not come as a frontal assault. Kale, for all his arrogance, was a serpent. He knew he could not win a direct battle against the disciplined warriors of Stonefell. So he struck not at the walls but at the heart. It happened during the first snow of winter. A small, elite force of his most loyal killers, using a hidden pass the scouts had missed, bypassed the main defenses. Their goal was not conquest. It was abduction. The alarm was a sharp, piercing cry in the night that was cut short. I was in my chambers when I heard the commotion, not the sound of a large battle, but of a small, vicious skirmish inside the fortress walls. Brenna burst into my room, her sword drawn, her eyes wide with fury. "They're here," she yelled. "They're after you." My blood ran cold. I wasn't just a symbol anymore. I was a target. Brenna and 2 other guards fought with desperate ferocity to hold the corridor, but Kale's assassins were single-minded. They ignored the guards, their eyes fixed on me. Their target. One of them broke through the line, a blur of dark fur and gleaming claws. He lunged for me. I threw myself back, my swollen belly making me clumsy. Just as his claws were about to find their mark, another body slammed into him from the side. It was Torvin, the warrior who had once threatened me. He met the assassin with a roar, his own body shielding me from the attack. "For the king. For our healer," he bellowed, his voice ringing with a loyalty he had once denied me. He fought like a demon, but he was outnumbered. He fell, a wicked-looking blade buried in his side, but he had bought me precious seconds. Brenna grabbed my arm, pulling me toward a hidden door behind a tapestry. "The king's escape route. Go. We'll hold them off," she screamed, turning back to the fight. I ran, my lungs burning, my heart screaming in terror. I didn't get far. As I burst into a side courtyard, hoping to lose myself in the blizzard, he was there, waiting for me. His eyes burned with a possessive, manic light. "Did you really think he could protect you from me?" he sneered, taking a slow step toward me. "You are mine. That pup is mine. And I have come to collect my property." Chapter 18. The King's Fury. Kale advanced on me, his smile a terrifying slash in the falling snow. My back was against a cold stone wall. There was nowhere left to run. My own wolf rose within me, a surge of desperate, protective fury. I would die here before I let him lay a hand on my child. I bared my teeth, a low snarl ripping from my throat. He laughed. "Still playing the warrior, little Omega? Your defiance is pathetic." He lunged, not to kill but to capture. His hands reached for me, his fingers spread like claws. He never touched me. A blur of silver and storm gray fur slammed into him with the force of an avalanche. Ryker. He had appeared from the shadows like a phantom of vengeance, his rage a palpable physical force that made the air itself tremble. The shift was instantaneous, a violent explosion of snapping bone and tearing flesh. The Ice King was gone. In his place was a dire wolf larger than any Lycan I had ever seen, a beast of pure, untamed alpha fury. He didn't just attack Kale, he annihilated him. The fight was brutally short. Kale, who had seemed so powerful in his own pack, was a child before the raw, ancient power of the Stone King. Ryker's fangs sank into his shoulder, and he threw Kale across the courtyard like a rag doll. Kale crashed into the wall just feet from me, his body broken. Ryker stood over him, his massive form radiating a cold, lethal promise. He was going to kill him. "No," I whispered, my voice shaking. The sound cut through his rage. He turned his head, his silver eyes, now burning with the fire of his wolf, locking with mine. A wave of pain suddenly clenched my body, stealing my breath and dropping me to my knees. A gasp tore from my lips. It wasn't from fear. It was sharp, primal. The stress, the terror, it had been too much. The pup. My son. He was coming. Ryker's fury instantly vanished, replaced by a wave of frantic concern. The dire wolf receded, and the man returned, his face pale with a terror that had nothing to do with battle. He rushed to my side as another contraction ripped through me. Behind us, Kale, bleeding and broken, pushed himself up, a silver dagger appearing in his hand. His eyes were filled with the crazed light of a king who had lost everything. If he couldn't have me, no one would. He lunged not at Ryker but at me. Chapter 19. A life for a life. Time seemed to slow to a crawl. I saw the silver blade arcing through the snow-filled air, aimed directly at my heart. I saw the triumphant, insane sneer on Kale's face. I saw Ryker, his eyes wide with horror, spinning to intercept. He wouldn't be fast enough. But someone else was. A flash of steel, a grunt of effort, and a body fell between me and Kale's blade. Brenna. She had followed me, her loyalty absolute. The dagger meant for me sank deep into her chest. Her eyes widened in shock, then her legs gave out. Ryker's roar was a sound of pure, untamed grief and fury. Before Kale could pull the blade free, Ryker was on him. There was no mercy this time. No holding back. It was not an execution. It was a final, brutal ending. I screamed Brenna's name, crawling to her side as another contraction seized me. Her blood was a stark crimson stain against the pure white snow. The pup, she choked, a bloody smile on her lips. Protect our prince. Her eyes glazed over, her last breath a misty cloud in the cold air. Ryker was at my side in an instant, his hands covered in the blood of his enemies. He gathered me into his arms, his face a mask of anguish. Elara. Stay with me. The baby, he's coming, now. I gasped, the pain overwhelming me. The world was a spinning vortex of pain, grief, and the biting cold of the storm. Ryker lifted me as if I weighed nothing, his strength a solid anchor in the chaos. He carried me back into the heart of the fortress, bellowing for Maeve, his voice a raw cry of desperation and command. He was a king who had just won a war, but at that moment he was just a man, terrified of losing the one thing that had brought his stone heart back to life. Chapter 20. Sunrise over the kingdom. The birth was a storm, a battle fought in the quiet chambers of the healer's wing. Maeve worked with calm, steady hands, but it was Ryker who was my rock. He refused to leave my side. He held my hand, his voice a low, steady murmur, lending me his strength, his will, his very soul. He was not a king in that room, he was a mate, a partner, a father. Just before dawn, as the blizzard outside began to fade, my son was born. A cry, thin but strong, cut through the exhausted silence. He was perfect. A dusting of dark hair and eyes that, when they opened, were the same startling, impossible silver as his king's. Maeve cleaned him and wrapped him in a soft fur, placing him in my arms. As I held him, my Kaelin, the pain, the fear, the years of loneliness, all of it washed away, replaced by a love so profound it was a physical ache in my chest. Ryker knelt beside the bed, his large, calloused finger gently stroking the baby's cheek. A single tear traced a path down his scarred face, the first I had ever seen him shed. It was a tear not of sorrow but of overwhelming, earth-shattering joy. "Our son," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. He leaned down and kissed my forehead, a gesture of profound reverence. "Pie Queen." The formal ceremony was held a week later. The remaining Blackwood pack, now leaderless and broken, had bent the knee, swearing fealty to the king who had shown them what true strength and honor looked like. The two packs were to be united. I stood on the balcony of the throne room, Ryker at my side, holding our son. I was not the rejected Omega anymore. I was Elara of Stonefell, healer of the united packs. I was a mother. And I was the chosen mate of the Stone King, the woman who had not just been claimed by him, but who had claimed his heart in return. As the sun's first golden rays crested the peaks, spilling light over our new, peaceful kingdom, Ryker leaned in and marked me. The brief, sharp pain was not a wound but a promise. A permanent, sacred seal that declared to the world that I was his, and he was mine forever. He had taken my broken life and not just mended it but made it into a crown. Looking out at our people with my son held safely between us, I knew I was finally home. I was no longer a ghost, a curse, or a rogue. I was a queen. And our reign was just beginning. Chapter 21. The Weight of Two Crowns. Victory was not the end of the war. It was the beginning of a fragile, brittle peace. The surviving Blackwood warriors, now integrated into Stonefell by oath, were a sullen, resentful presence within the fortress. They had been raised on Kael's doctrine of ruthless strength, and they viewed Ryker's honor and my own elevation from Omega to Queen with suspicion and contempt. The halls that had begun to feel like home were now filled with the silent tension of a coming storm. The first challenge came in the Great Hall. A former Blackwood elder, a grizzled traditionalist named Fenris, stood to publicly question a decree from Ryker. "The Stone King asks us to share our hunt quotas equally," Fenris sneered, his voice loud enough for all to hear. "But we were the ones who were conquered. Should the vanquished feast as well as the victors? And why should we listen to a king who takes a rejected Omega as his queen?" The hall fell into a deathly silence. Every eye was on Ryker, who sat on his stone throne, his face an unreadable mask of cold authority. His warriors bristled, their hands moving to their weapons. This was a direct challenge, a test of his new expanded rule. Before Ryker could speak, I stepped forward, holding Kaelin in my arms. "I will answer the elder's question," I said, my voice clear and steady, ringing through the cavernous hall. I walked until I stood before Fenris, meeting his hostile gaze without flinching. "You speak of vanquished and victors. But I see only Lycans. I was once Blackwood just as you are. I was cast out, left for dead by a leader who valued his pride more than his people, more than his own blood." I looked around at the faces of my former packmates. "Kael's rule brought you here to your knees before a foreign king. My path brought me here to stand beside that king as his equal. Tell me, elder," I finished, my voice dropping to a powerful whisper, "which of us is truly the vanquished?" A murmur went through the crowd. I had not used Ryker's power to silence him. I had used the truth. Ryker rose from his throne, his silver eyes blazing not with anger but with pride. "The Queen has spoken," he boomed. "There are no Blackwood or Stonefell wolves anymore. There's only my pack. Her pack. Our pack. Anyone who cannot accept that can choose exile. All who stay will be treated as one. That is my law." He had won the battle. But as I looked into the resentful eyes of Fenris, I knew the war for the soul of our new united pack had just begun. Chapter 22. Scars and Oaths. The deepest wounds of the war were not in the stone walls, but in the flesh and spirit of the pack. The healer's wing was full, and I spent my days and nights tending to the injured of both Stonefell and former Blackwood warriors. Healing was a language that required no politics, only care, and with every wound I stitched, I was mending the frayed edges of our two packs. The most difficult patient was Torvin. He had survived, but the assassin's blade had been poisoned. He lay in a fevered state, his life hanging by a thread. His mate and pup kept a constant tearful vigil by his side. Ryker came to me as I was grinding herbs for a new poultice. "Maeve says he is lost," he said, his voice heavy with the grief of a king who feels the loss of every warrior personally. "Maeve is a wise healer," I replied, not looking up from my work. "But she is not a mother who has fought for her child's life. I will not let him die." For 3 days I did not leave Torvin's side. I used every secret my parents had taught me, every instinct my own near-death experience had honed. I flushed the poison from his veins with a rare root found only on the highest mountain peaks, a root Ryker himself retrieved for me in a single perilous nighttime journey. On the 4th morning Torvin's fever broke. He opened his eyes, clear and lucid for the first time in days, and looked at me. "You," he rasped, his voice weak. "You saved me. After I threatened you. You saved me first," I said softly, offering him a cup of water. "You shielded me from the blade. You bled for your pack. For your king. And for your queen." Tears welled in the hardened warrior's eyes. He struggled to sit up, but Ryker, who had been standing silently in the doorway, came and gently pushed him back down. "Rest, my friend," Ryker said, his voice filled with a quiet gratitude. Torvin looked from Ryker to me and then to his sleeping pup in a chair nearby. He understood. His old prejudices, his loyalty to a broken system had been washed away in the fever. He was loyal to the king who valued his life and to the queen who had saved it. "My life," Torvin whispered, his voice gaining strength, "is sworn to you both. To our prince Kaelin. Forever." It was more than an oath of fealty. It was the first true stone laid in the foundation of our united kingdom. Chapter 23. A Whisper of Prophecy. With the pack slowly healing, a sense of normalcy began to return to Stonefell. One evening Maeve came to my chambers. She was not there as a healer but as a lore keeper, her eyes holding the ancient misty light of something much older than herself. She asked to see Kaelin, who was sleeping in his cradle. As she looked down at him, a strange, reverent awe settled on her face. "It is true," she whispered, her hand trembling as she reached out, almost touching his head before pulling back. The old tales were not just stories. "What stories?" I asked, a sense of unease prickling my skin. Maeve turned to me, her eyes wide. "An ancient prophecy speaks of a king of stone and a healer of the wood. It says that when a bond, once broken by pride, gives way to a claim forged in honor, a child will be born. A pup who carries the blood of two rival packs in his veins, but the soul of a united kingdom in his heart." She looked from me to where Ryker now stood, having entered silently. "The prophecy calls this child the Peace Weaver. It says he will rule over a kingdom greater than any that has come before, a kingdom where the strength of the warrior and the compassion of the healer are one and the same." Ryker and I looked at each other, then down at our sleeping son. A child conceived from a lie, born in a storm of violence, was now the subject of a sacred prophecy. He was not just our son, the heir we had fought to protect. He was a symbol of destiny, a promise of a golden age. "He will not bear this burden alone," Ryker said, his voice a low, fierce vow. He came and wrapped his arm around me, his other hand resting on the cradle. "We will build this kingdom for him. We will create the peace that he is destined to weave." The weight of the prophecy was immense, but it was not a burden. It was a purpose. It gave a name to the future we were fighting to create, a future not just of survival, but of a legacy that would echo through the ages. Chapter 24. The Quiet Moments. The titles, King, Queen, Healer, Prince, were for the world. But in the quiet moments, in the deep of the night, we were simply a family. The throne room was often where Ryker worked late, poring over maps and pack ledgers. One night I came to him carrying a sleeping Kaelin in my arms. The fire had burned low and the great hall was filled with long, quiet shadows. Ryker looked up, the weariness on his face melting away as he saw us. He pushed the scrolls aside and opened his arms. I sat on his lap, right there on the cold stone throne, and nestled against his chest. He wrapped his arms around both me and our son, creating a warm, solid world of his own. "Do you ever miss the silence?" I asked softly, my head resting on his shoulder. "Before all of this. Before me." He was quiet for a long moment, his hand stroking Kaelin's soft hair. "The silence was not peace, Elara," he finally said, his voice a low rumble against my ear. "It was emptiness. A fortress with nothing inside to protect. It was a kingdom of ghosts." He tightened his embrace, pulling us closer. "This is the first time in 20 years that this castle has felt like a home." He leaned down and kissed me, a slow, gentle kiss that spoke of a deeper intimacy than any passion. It was a kiss of gratitude, of partnership, of a love that had been forged in fire and tempered into something unbreakable. "I was a king of stone," he whispered against my lips. "You and Kaelin, you have taught me how to be a man of flesh and blood again. You are the heart of this kingdom. You are the heart of me." In the quiet of the throne room, with our son sleeping safely between us, the wars and prophecies and politics all faded away. There was only this. A man, a woman, and a child. A pack of 3. The strongest pack in the world. This was the peace we had earned. This was our victory. Chapter 25. The Queen's Garden. Months bled into a year. Kaelin grew from a baby into a toddler, his silver eyes filled with a fierce curiosity, his unsteady steps taking him all over the fortress he would one day rule. The two packs had finally, truly become one, their old rivalries replaced by a shared loyalty to the family that had united them. One crisp autumn afternoon I was in the garden. My garden now. The unmarked stone that had once been a symbol of Ryker's grief was now surrounded by life. I had planted new herbs, their scents mingling in the cool air. Willow for healing, wolfsbane for protection, and at the center, a resilient mountain rose for love. I was showing Kaelin how to crumble soil in his small, chubby hands when Ryker joined us. He didn't wear his crown, only the simple leather tunic of a man at home. He knelt beside us, his large hand covering Kaelin's, a quiet lesson from father to son. "My mother would have loved this," he said, his voice soft, the old grief finally replaced by a gentle peace. "She would have loved you both." He looked at me, his eyes holding the entirety of our journey. The fear, the fight, the loss, and the love that had conquered it all. He had not just claimed a rejected rogue. He had found the missing half of his own soul. I had not just been rescued, I had found the strength I never knew I possessed. We were not the broken people who had met in a dark forest. We were a king and queen who had built a kingdom from the ashes of their past. Kalen giggled, patting the dirt, and we watched him, our hands brushing. The prophecy, the titles, the weight of the crowns, it all faded into the background. The boy who was rejected was a coward. The king who claimed me was my destiny. But the family we had become, right here in this garden of healing and new life, was our legacy. For the first time, looking at my son and the man I loved, my past was not a scar. It was simply the long, winding path that had finally, miraculously led me home.